My daughter-in-law threw a meal on the floor and said, "Stop being a burden and go clean it up. If you're not helping with the bills, you'll be my maid." At that very moment, my son walked into the house. The action he took left her in shock. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I'm Lorna, and at 66 years old, I never imagined I'd be living as a servant in my own son's house. For 2 years now, I've been walking on eggshells around Nola, my daughter-in-law, watching every word I say and every move I make. But what happened that Tuesday afternoon changed everything forever. The smell of roasted chicken filled the kitchen as I carefully arranged the plates on the dining table. I'd spent the entire morning preparing Desmond's favorite meal, hoping it might ease the tension that had been suffocating our home for weeks. Nola had been particularly cruel lately, finding new ways to remind me that I was nothing more than a burden in their lives. "Is lunch ready yet?" Nola's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. She appeared in the doorway wearing one of her expensive workout outfits, the kind that cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently against the doorframe as she looked me up and down with that familiar expression of disgust. "Yes, dear," I replied softly, my hands trembling slightly as I placed the last fork beside the plate. "I made Desmond's favorite chicken with those herbs you like." She walked to the table, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with each deliberate step. I watched as she examined the meal I'd spent hours preparing, her lips pursed in that way that always meant trouble was coming. "This looks terrible," she said flatly, picking up a piece of chicken with her fork and letting it drop back onto the plate with a wet thud. "Look at this grease. Do you want Desmond to have a heart attack?" My stomach nodded. I'd been cooking for over 40 years, raised 3 children on my own after my husband died, and never once had anyone complained about my meals. But living with Nola had taught me that nothing I did would ever be good enough. "I'm sorry," I whispered, reaching for the plate. "I can make something else. Don't touch it." Her voice was ice cold. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I'm sick of this, Lorna. Sick of pretending that having you here is some kind of blessing when all you do is create more work for everyone." I felt the familiar sting of tears threatening to fall, but I blinked them back. Crying only made things worse with Nola. It seemed to fuel her cruelty, like she fed off my pain. "I try my best to help around the house," I said quietly, my voice barely audible. "I clean, I cook, I do the laundry. Help?" Nola laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You call this helping? You're nothing but dead weight, Lorna. A burden we can't shake off." She picked up her plate with both hands, and for a moment, I thought she was going to take it to the kitchen. Instead, she held it high above the table and let it crash to the floor. The ceramic shattered into a dozen pieces, sending chicken, vegetables, and gravy splattering across the clean tiles I'd mopped just that morning. I stared at the mess in shock, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. In all my years, no one had ever treated me with such deliberate cruelty. Not even during the worst times after my husband's death, when money was tight and the children were hungry, had I felt so utterly worthless. "Clean it up," Nola commanded, crossing her arms over her chest. "And while you're down there scrubbing like the good little servant you are, maybe you'll remember your place in this house." My knees were already aching from the arthritis that had been getting worse each year, but I slowly lowered myself to the floor. The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over as I began picking up the larger pieces of broken plate. Each shard felt like a piece of my dignity being torn away. "If you're not going to help with the bills," Nola continued, her voice growing louder and more vicious, "then you're going to be my maid. That's the deal, old woman. You want a roof over your head? You earn it on your hands and knees." I couldn't speak. The words were trapped in my throat along with years of swallowed pride and silent suffering. I just kept picking up the pieces, my tears mixing with the gravy on the floor as I tried to salvage what remained of the meal I'd prepared with such hope. That's when I heard the front door open. Heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway, and I knew Desmond was home from work. My heart sank even further. Now he would see me like this, on my hands and knees, crying over spilled food like some broken old woman who couldn't even serve a proper meal. "Nola, Mom, I'm home," his voice called out from the entryway. I heard him set down his briefcase and keys on the hall table, the same routine he'd followed every day for the past 2 years. His footsteps grew closer, and I tried frantically to wipe my eyes with the back of my hand, hoping he wouldn't notice I'd been crying. When Desmond appeared in the dining room doorway, I was still on my knees, surrounded by broken ceramic and scattered food. Nola stood over me with her arms crossed, like a queen surveying her conquered territory. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled too tight. I looked up at my son, this man I'd raised from a baby, whom I'd sacrificed everything for, hoping to see some flicker of concern in his eyes. What I saw instead made my blood turn cold. Desmond's face was completely unreadable, his dark eyes moving from the mess on the floor to his wife's triumphant expression, to my tear-stained face. "What happened here?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying a strange edge I'd never heard before. Nola's smile widened, confident in her victory. "Your mother had a little accident with lunch. I was just explaining to her that if she's going to live here, she needs to understand her responsibilities." Desmond stepped further into the room, his gaze fixed on the scene before him. He was still wearing his navy business suit, the one I'd helped him pick out for his promotion last year. His tie was loosened, and there was something in his posture that made the air in the room feel different, charged somehow. "Her responsibilities," he repeated slowly, as if testing the words. "That's right," Nola said, moving closer to him with that same confident stride. "I've been too patient, too understanding, but I'm done pretending that having her here isn't affecting our marriage, our happiness." I stayed frozen on the floor, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. This was the moment I'd been dreading for months. The moment when Desmond would finally choose between his wife and his mother, and I already knew who would win. But then something unexpected happened. Desmond's expression changed. It was subtle at first, just a slight tightening around his eyes, but I'd known that face since the day he was born. I could read every emotion that crossed it, even when he tried to hide them. "You're absolutely right, Nola," he said, his voice deadly calm. "It's time we address this situation once and for all." Nola's smile grew even wider, and she moved to stand beside him, already reaching for his arm in a gesture of united victory. But Desmond didn't look at her. Instead, his eyes met mine, and in that instant, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. My son wasn't angry with me. He was furious with his wife. The look in Desmond's eyes wasn't disappointment or embarrassment about his mother's position on the floor. It was rage, cold and controlled, directed entirely at the woman who thought she'd just won the war for his loyalty. Nola hadn't noticed yet. She was too busy basking in what she believed was her moment of triumph. But I could see the storm gathering in my son's face, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt a tiny spark of hope flicker to life in my chest. The silence in the dining room stretched on for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than a few seconds. I remained on my knees among the scattered food and broken ceramic, my heart hammering against my ribs as I watched my son's face transform. The calm, professional mask he usually wore was cracking, revealing something underneath that made Nola's confident smile begin to waver. "Desmond?" she said, her voice carrying a hint of uncertainty for the first time. "Honey, help me explain to your mother how things need to be around here." My son didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked slowly around the mess on the floor, his polished dress shoes careful not to step on any of the broken pieces. When he reached me, he knelt down, his expensive suit be damned, and gently took my shoulders in his hands. "Mom," he said softly, "let me help you up." The kindness in his voice after months of cold indifference made fresh tears spring to my eyes. His hands were steady and strong as he helped me to my feet, and for a moment, I felt like I was looking at the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knees. Nola's expression shifted from confusion to irritation. "Desmond, what are you doing? She needs to clean this up. She made the mess." "No," Desmond said quietly, still holding my arm to steady me. "She didn't." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Nola's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. What do you mean she didn't? I saw her drop the plate. She's getting clumsy in her old age. Stop. The single word cut through her explanation like a knife. Desmond finally turned to face his wife, and I saw Nola take an involuntary step backward. Just stop talking, Nola. Excuse me? Her voice rose an octave, the way it always did when she felt challenged. How dare you speak to me that way in front of her? Desmond looked at her for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his words carefully. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, but carried an undertone that made my skin prickle. I've been watching you, he said. For months now, I've been watching how you treat my mother when you think I'm not around. Nola's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Desmond walked to the kitchen counter and opened the small drawer where we kept the utility bills and household papers. From underneath a stack of envelopes, he pulled out a small black device that I didn't recognize at first. Because I have hours of footage that says otherwise. My breath caught in my throat. It was a tiny camera, smaller than a matchbox. Nola stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. You've been recording me? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I've been protecting my mother, Desmond corrected, his voice growing harder. Something I should have done a long time ago. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times. Suddenly, Nola's voice filled the room, crystal clear through the phone's speaker. You're nothing but dead weight, Lorna, a burden we can't shake off. Nola's face crumpled. Desmond, you don't understand. Living with her is so stressful, and sometimes you just what? He tapped the phone again, and another recording played. This time it was Nola's voice from last week, when she'd made me scrub the bathroom floor twice because she claimed it wasn't clean enough. The cruelty in her tone was even worse hearing it played back. You called my mother pathetic, Desmond said, his voice getting louder now. You told her she was a waste of space. You made her eat her meals standing up in the kitchen because you said she didn't deserve to sit at our table. Each accusation hit Nola like a physical blow. She kept shaking her head, her perfectly styled hair coming loose from its pins. You're taking everything out of context. You don't see how she provokes me. How she what? Desmond's voice was rising now, months of suppressed anger finally breaking free. How she cleans our house, how she cooks our meals, how she does our laundry and never asks for anything in return except basic human decency? I stood frozen by the dining table, afraid to move or speak. I'd never seen my son like this before. The Desmond I knew was quiet, diplomatic, someone who avoided confrontation at all costs. This man standing in our dining room was someone else entirely, someone who'd been pushed too far. I had to install cameras in my own home, he continued, his voice breaking slightly, because I couldn't believe my own wife was capable of treating an elderly woman, my mother, like an animal. Nola's composure completely shattered. How long? She demanded. How long have you been spying on me? 3 months, Desmond said without hesitation. Ever since Mom lost 15 pounds and I noticed she was jumping every time a door slammed. Ever since I came home early one day and heard you screaming at her about how she was ruining your life. My hand flew to my throat. I remembered that day. I'd been so careful to hide the marks where Nola had grabbed my arm, so sure that Desmond hadn't heard anything. You heard that? I whispered. Desmond turned to me, and I saw tears in his eyes for the first time since he was a child. I heard everything, Mom. And I've been collecting evidence ever since because I knew if I confronted her without proof, she'd find a way to turn it around on you. Nola suddenly lunged forward, reaching for the phone. Delete those recordings right now. You have no right. Desmond pulled the phone away, his reflexes quicker than hers. I have every right to protect my mother in her own home. This isn't her home, Nola screamed, all pretense of control finally gone. This is my house, mine and yours. She's just a guest who's overstayed her welcome. The words echoed through the room like gunshots. Even Nola seemed shocked by her own viciousness, covering her mouth with her hand as if she could take them back. Desmond stared at his wife for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was so quiet I had to strain to hear him. You're right, Nola. This isn't Mom's home, but it's not yours either. Nola frowned, confusion replacing the anger on her face. What do you mean? I mean, Desmond said, walking to the kitchen counter and pulling out a folder I'd never seen before, that this house is in my name only. The mortgage, the deed, the insurance, all of it. You never contributed a single dollar to the down payment, and you've never made a single mortgage payment. He opened the folder and spread several official-looking documents across the counter. I've been married to you for 3 years, Nola, and in all that time you've never held a job for longer than 2 months. Every bill in this house, every grocery purchase, every utility payment has come out of my account or my mother's Social Security check. Nola's face went from pale to gray. Those were just temporary setbacks. I was looking for the right opportunity. You were looking for someone to take care of you, Desmond interrupted. And when my mother moved in, you saw her as competition for my attention and resources. So you decided to make her life hell until she left voluntarily. The truth of his words hit me like a physical blow. All this time, I'd thought Nola's cruelty was just personality differences, cultural clashes, the normal friction that comes with multiple generations living under one roof. I'd never considered that it was calculated, deliberate. That's not true, Nola protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Desmond tapped his phone again, and another recording filled the room. This time it was Nola talking to someone on the phone, probably one of her friends. The old bat will get tired of it eventually and move out. Then Desmond and I can finally have our privacy back. And maybe I can convince him to give me access to his accounts. The silence that followed was deafening. Nola's mouth moved, but no sound came out. She looked like someone who'd just watched their entire world collapse. 3 months of recordings, Desmond said quietly. 3 months of documenting every cruel word, every deliberate humiliation, every calculated cruelty. Did you really think I wouldn't notice what you were doing to the woman who raised me? I felt my knees go weak, and I had to grip the back of a chair to stay upright. My son had known. For 3 months, he'd known what I was suffering and had been working in secret to protect me. All those times I'd felt so alone, so abandoned. He'd been watching, planning, gathering evidence. Desmond, I whispered. Why didn't you tell me? He turned to me with eyes full of regret. Because I needed her to hang herself with her own rope, Mom. I needed proof that couldn't be disputed, evidence that would hold up if this ever went to court. Court? Nola's voice was a strangled whisper. Desmond looked at his wife with an expression I'd never seen before, cold and final. Divorce court, Nola. I filed the papers this morning. The words hit the room like a bomb going off. Nola staggered backward, her hand reaching for the wall to steady herself. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life, Desmond replied. You have until Friday to pack your things and find somewhere else to live. Nola's face twisted with rage and desperation. You can't throw me out. I'm your wife. You're a woman who's been psychologically abusing my mother for 2 years, Desmond said. And I have the evidence to prove it. As I watched Nola's world crumble around her, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. But I also felt a chill run down my spine because I could see in her eyes that this wasn't over. Nola wasn't the type of person to accept defeat quietly, and I was right to be afraid, because what she did next would test every bond between my son and me. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of hushed voices coming from the kitchen. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Forgot everything that had happened the day before. Then reality came flooding back. The broken plate, Nola's cruelty, and Desmond's shocking revelation about the cameras. I wrapped my old terry cloth robe around my shoulders and padded quietly down the hallway. The voices grew clearer as I approached the kitchen, and I recognized Desmond's low tones mixed with someone else's voice, a man I didn't recognize. The recordings are more than enough, the stranger was saying. Psychological abuse, financial manipulation, creating a hostile living environment for an elderly person. Any judge would see this as grounds for divorce and possibly criminal charges. I stopped at the doorway, not wanting to interrupt but desperate to understand what was happening. Desmond was sitting at the kitchen table with a man in an expensive suit, papers spread between them like a battle plan. Mr. Patterson, Desmond said, his voice tired but determined. I need to make sure my mother is protected through all of this. Nola isn't going to go quietly. The man, Mr. Patterson, looked up from his papers and noticed me standing in the doorway. He was younger than I'd expected for a lawyer, maybe in his 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mrs. Henderson, he said, standing up respectfully. "I'm David Patterson, your son's attorney. Would you like to join us?" Desmond turned in his chair, and I saw relief wash over his face when he saw me. "Mom, please, you need to hear this." I moved slowly into the kitchen, still not quite believing this was real. Yesterday I'd been scrubbing food off the floor like a servant, and now there was a lawyer at my kitchen table discussing my rights. "Where's Nola?" I asked quietly. "Gone," Desmond said. "She left about an hour after you went to bed last night, packed 2 suitcases and drove off without saying a word." I felt a mixture of relief and worry. "Where did she go?" "Her sister's house, probably," Desmond replied. "But that's not what matters right now. What matters is making sure you understand what's been happening behind the scenes." Mr. Patterson gestured to a chair, and I sat down carefully, my arthritis making my joints protest the early morning movement. He slid a manila folder across the table to me. "Mrs. Henderson, your son has been preparing for this moment for quite some time. The evidence he's collected isn't just about divorce proceedings. It's about protecting you from any future retaliation or legal challenges." I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of photographs, transcripts of recordings, and official-looking documents I didn't understand. "I don't follow," I said softly. Desmond leaned forward, his expression serious. "Mom, 3 months ago, I hired a private investigator to look into Nola's background. What we found was disturbing." He pulled out a thick report from the bottom of the stack. "Nola has done this before. Twice." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" Mr. Patterson took over the explanation. "Your daughter-in-law was previously married to 2 other men, both significantly older and both with elderly parents living in their homes. In each case, she systematically made life unbearable for the elderly parents until they either moved out or were placed in nursing homes." I stared at the papers, the words blurring together as I tried to process what I was hearing. She? She planned this? "More than that," Desmond said, his voice heavy with guilt. "In her first marriage, the elderly father died of a stress-induced heart attack 6 months after she moved in. In the second marriage, the mother had a stroke and is now in a care facility that costs the family everything they have." The room started spinning around me. I gripped the edge of the table, fighting off a wave of nausea. "And you think she was trying to kill you?" Desmond's voice broke. "Mom, the stress she was putting you under, the constant anxiety, the way she was isolating you from me. Yes, I think that was exactly what she was trying to do." Mr. Patterson placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "We can't prove intent to harm Mrs. Henderson, but we can prove a pattern of behavior that puts elderly people at serious risk." I looked up at my son, this man I'd raised from a baby, and saw the pain in his eyes. "How long have you known?" "I started suspecting something was wrong about 6 months ago," he admitted. "You were losing weight. You seemed afraid all the time. And whenever I tried to talk to you alone, Nola would find an excuse to interrupt. But it wasn't until I hired the investigator that I understood how calculated it all was." He pulled out another document, this one with Nola's photo attached. "She targets men like me, Mom. Men who are financially stable but emotionally vulnerable because they're caring for aging parents. She presents herself as supportive and understanding, then slowly turns the household into a war zone." "But why didn't you tell me?" I whispered, tears starting to flow down my cheeks. "I thought you didn't care anymore. I thought you were choosing her over me." Desmond's face crumpled with guilt. "Because I needed evidence that would hold up in court. If I'd confronted her without proof, she could have turned it around, made you look like the problem. She could have convinced people that you were the one being difficult, that I was an ungrateful son who couldn't handle caring for his mother." Mr. Patterson nodded. "Your son was protecting you the only way he could, Mrs. Henderson. By building an airtight case that would ensure Nola couldn't hurt you or manipulate the situation." I thought about all those months of feeling abandoned, of believing my own son had stopped loving me. The loneliness had been crushing, but now I understood it had been necessary. "The cameras," I said suddenly. "How many were there?" 7, Desmond replied. "Kitchen, dining room, living room, laundry room, and 3 different angles in the hallways. I needed to document everything she was doing when she thought no one was watching." He pulled out his phone and showed me a video I'd never seen before. It was from last month, when Nola had cornered me in the laundry room and screamed at me for 20 minutes because I'd folded her shirts wrong. Watching it back, I could see how calculated her cruelty was, how she positioned herself to block the exit, how she used her height to loom over me intimidatingly. She knew exactly what she was doing, I breathed. Every single time, Desmond confirmed. The investigator found evidence that she'd researched techniques for psychological manipulation of elderly people. She had books about it, Mom. Actual books about how to break down an older person's resistance. The horror of it was overwhelming. I'd thought I was going crazy. Thought maybe I really was becoming the burden Nola said I was. But it had all been deliberately orchestrated to make me feel that way. What happens now? I asked. Mr. Patterson consulted his notes. Well, the divorce will be straightforward given the evidence. Nola won't be entitled to any assets since the marriage was based on fraud and abuse. But more importantly, we're going to file for a restraining order to keep her away from both of you. Do you think she'll try to come back? Desmond and the lawyer exchanged a look that made my stomach clench. Mom, Desmond said carefully, there's something else you need to know. Something we discovered yesterday that changes everything. He pulled out one final document, and I could see his hand shaking as he placed it in front of me. Nola isn't just dangerous because of her pattern of abuse. She's dangerous because she's desperate. I looked down at the paper. It was a bank statement, but not one I recognized. She's been stealing from you, Mom. For over a year, she's been taking money from your Social Security direct deposit before it even reaches your account. The numbers on the page swam before my eyes. Thousands of dollars. Money I'd thought was going to help with household expenses. Money I'd willingly contributed thinking it was my fair share. How much? I whispered. $14,000, Mr. Patterson said quietly. She set up a secondary account with your information and has been diverting a portion of your benefits each month. I felt like I was falling through the floor. Not only had she been psychologically torturing me, she'd been stealing from me. A woman living on Social Security, taking what little financial security I had. But here's the thing that really scares me, Desmond continued. According to the investigator, when Nola's previous schemes fell apart, she didn't just disappear quietly. She escalated. What do you mean, escalated? Mr. Patterson opened another file. In her first marriage, after the elderly father died, she tried to convince her husband that his mother had left him money that was rightfully hers. When that didn't work, she started spreading rumors in the community that the son had been abusing his father. In the second marriage, Desmond added, after the mother had her stroke, Nola tried to get power of attorney over the woman's finances. When the family refused, she filed false reports with Adult Protective Services claiming the family was neglecting the mother's medical care. I stared at them both, hardly able to breathe. And you think she'll do something like that to us? I think, Desmond said grimly, that Nola is going to try everything she can to destroy our relationship and take whatever she can get in the process. The question is whether we'll be ready for her when she does. Just then, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, Nola's voice came through the speaker, sweet as honey and twice as poisonous. Lorna, darling, she said, we need to talk. The look of alarm that passed between Desmond and Mr. Patterson told me everything I needed to know. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Nola's voice on the phone was so different from the woman who had screamed at me just 24 hours ago that I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the venom, the cruelty that had become her trademark. Instead, she sounded vulnerable, almost childlike. Lorna, please don't hang up, she continued when I didn't respond immediately. I know you must hate me right now, but I need you to understand something important. Desmond was frantically gesturing for me to put the phone on speaker, while Mr. Patterson pulled out a small recording device. I pressed the speaker button with trembling fingers. What do you want, Nola? I managed to say. I want to apologize, she said, and I could hear what sounded like tears in her voice. I want to explain why I've been so horrible to you, and I want to make things right before it's too late. Desmond's eyes were wide with alarm. He grabbed a notepad and quickly scribbled, "Don't believe her. This is part of her pattern." But despite everything I'd learned about Nola in the past day, despite all the evidence of her calculated cruelty, There was still a part of me that wanted to believe people could change. A part of me that had been trained by 66 years of giving people the benefit of the doubt. "I'm listening," I said quietly. "Thank you," Nola whispered. "Lorna, I need you to know that everything I did came from a place of fear. I was so afraid that Desmond would choose you over me, that I would lose the only good thing that ever happened to me." She paused, and I could hear her take a shuddering breath. "I've never had a real family before. My parents were drug addicts who abandoned me when I was 12. I've been on my own my whole life, never learning how to share love, never understanding that families don't have to be competitions." Mr. Patterson was shaking his head vigorously, but I found myself softening despite everything. Could someone really fake this level of vulnerability? "When Desmond brought me into your lives," Nola continued, "I saw how close you two were. And instead of feeling grateful to be part of something beautiful, I felt threatened. I thought if I could drive a wedge between you, if I could make you leave, then Desmond would need me more." "Nola," I said softly, "what you did to me was more than just being afraid. You were deliberately cruel." "I know," she sobbed. "I know, and I hate myself for it. But Lorna, there's something else, something I haven't told anyone, not even Desmond." Desmond leaned forward, his expression intense. Mr. Patterson had his pen ready, taking notes on everything she said. "What is it?" I asked. "I'm pregnant." The words hit the kitchen like a physical blow. Desmond went completely white, his mouth falling open in shock. Mr. Patterson's pen stopped moving. I felt my heart skip several beats. "How far along?" I whispered. 3 months, Nola said. "I found out the day after you moved in with us, and I panicked. I was so afraid that Desmond would choose his mother and his grandchild over me, that he would push me aside once the baby came. I looked at my son, saw the conflict raging across his face. A grandchild. The possibility of being a grandmother had always seemed remote, especially after Desmond's first marriage ended in divorce with no children. "Does Desmond know?" I asked. "He knows now," Nola said. "I told him this morning, right before I called you. I couldn't keep lying anymore." Desmond found his voice. "Mom, put the phone down. We need to talk privately." But Nola must have heard him because her voice became urgent, desperate. "Please don't let him shut me out, Lorna. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but this baby deserves a chance to have a real family, a grandmother who loves them." The manipulation was so subtle, so expertly crafted, that even knowing what I knew about Nola's past, I felt myself wavering. A grandchild would change everything. Could I really ask my son to choose between his mother and his unborn child? "I need to think," I said. "There's no time to think," Nola replied, and for the first time I heard an edge creep back into her voice. "Desmond has already filed divorce papers. He's trying to throw away our marriage, our future, our baby's future, because of what happened between us." "What happened between us was abuse," I said firmly. "It was a misunderstanding." Nola's voice was rising now, the mask slipping. "It was stress and pregnancy hormones and 2 women learning to live together. But Desmond is treating it like I'm some kind of monster." Desmond grabbed the phone from my hands. "You are a monster, Nola, and I don't believe for 1 second that you're pregnant." There was silence on the other end of the line, and when Nola spoke again, her voice was ice cold. "You want proof? Fine. Meet me at Dr. Morrison's office at 3 o'clock. I'll show you the ultrasound, and then we'll see who the real monster is when you abandon your pregnant wife and unborn child." She hung up before any of us could respond. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the wall clock and the sound of my own ragged breathing. Desmond was staring at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. "She's lying," he said finally. "She has to be lying." Mr. Patterson consulted his watch. "It's 11:30 now. Dr. Morrison's office would have records if she's been a patient. We could call and verify." "No," Desmond interrupted. "If she is pregnant, if there really is a baby, then everything changes." I felt a weight settling in my chest like a stone. "What do you mean?" "I mean I can't divorce a pregnant woman, Mom. I can't abandon my child, even if the mother is." He struggled to find the words. "Even if the mother is an abuser," I finished for him. even if she's dangerous. Desmond's shoulders sagged. What kind of man would I be if I left my pregnant wife? What kind of father would I be if I put my child through a divorce before they're even born? Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. Mr. Henderson, if I may, pregnancy doesn't erase abuse. Courts understand that staying in an abusive situation isn't healthy for anyone, including unborn children. But how can I ask my mother to live with someone who's carrying my child? Desmond looked between us, anguish written across his face. How can I ask Mom to endure more abuse for the sake of my marriage? The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. I looked at my son, this good man who was being torn apart by an impossible choice, and I felt something break inside my chest. You don't have to ask me anything, I said quietly. Both men turned to look at me. If Nola is really pregnant, I continued, then you need to focus on being a father. I can find somewhere else to live. Mom, no, Desmond said immediately. I won't let her drive you out of your home. This isn't my home, I said, echoing Nola's words from the day before. It's yours. And if you're going to have a family, you need space to build it. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for my mistakes, Desmond said firmly. I married Nola. I brought her into our lives. This is my responsibility to fix. Mr. Patterson looked uncomfortable. Perhaps we should confirm the pregnancy before making any major decisions. At 2:45, we were sitting in the waiting room of Dr. Morrison's office. Desmond hadn't spoken during the entire drive, and I could see the muscles in his jaw working as he stared at the floor. Mr. Patterson had stayed behind to continue reviewing the legal options, but he'd made us promise to call him immediately after the appointment. When Nola walked in, I barely recognized her. She was wearing a simple sundress instead of her usual designer outfits. Her hair was pulled back in a plain ponytail, and her face was free of makeup. She looked young and vulnerable, nothing like the woman who had terrorized me for months. Thank you for coming, she said softly, sitting in the chair across from us. I know this is hard for everyone. A nurse called her name before either of us could respond, and we followed her into a small examination room. Dr. Morrison was a kind-faced woman in her 50s who seemed genuinely pleased to see Nola. Mrs. Henderson, she said warmly, you're right on schedule for your 12-week appointment. How are you feeling? My heart sank. 12 weeks. The timeline matched exactly with what Nola had told us. Much better now that my family is here, Nola replied, reaching for Desmond's hand. He didn't pull away, but I could see the tension in his posture. The ultrasound machine hummed to life, and Dr. Morrison spread gel across Nola's exposed belly. Within moments, the screen filled with the grainy black and white image that I recognized from when Desmond was born 35 years ago. There's your baby, Dr. Morrison said, pointing to a small shape on the screen. Strong heartbeat, good size for gestational age. Everything looks perfect. I watched Desmond's face as he stared at the screen. Saw the exact moment when the reality hit him. He was going to be a father. Despite everything Nola had done, despite all the evidence of her cruelty and manipulation, there was an innocent life growing inside her. Can we have a picture? Nola asked quietly. Dr. Morrison printed several copies of the ultrasound image and handed them to Desmond. Congratulations, Dad. First baby? Yes, Desmond whispered, his voice thick with emotion. As we left the doctor's office, Nola walking between Desmond and me like she belonged there, I felt the last of my hope crumble. She had won. With one strategic pregnancy, she had guaranteed that she would never truly be out of our lives. But what I didn't know, what none of us realized until it was too late, was that Nola's victory was about to become the very thing that destroyed her completely, because there was one detail about that ultrasound, one crucial piece of information that would change everything, and we were about to discover it in the most devastating way possible. The ride home from Dr. Morrison's office was the longest 30 minutes of my life. Desmond drove in complete silence, the ultrasound pictures sitting on the dashboard between us like a surrender flag. Nola sat in the passenger seat, her hand resting protectively over her belly, occasionally glancing back at me with what looked like genuine remorse. For the first time in months, I felt truly defeated. Everything we'd discovered about Nola's past, all the evidence Desmond had gathered, the lawyer's careful plans. None of it mattered now. She was carrying my grandchild, and that changed everything. When we pulled into the driveway, I noticed Mr. Patterson's car was still there. Through the kitchen window, I could see him pacing while talking on his phone. The sight of him gave me a small spark of hope. Maybe there was still something that could be done legally to protect us. "I'll make some tea," I offered as we walked into the house, falling back into my familiar role of the peacekeeper. "That would be nice, thank you," Nola said softly. She settled onto the couch and patted the cushion next to her. "Desmond, will you sit with me? We need to talk about our future." I busied myself in the kitchen, trying not to listen to their conversation but unable to help myself. Through the doorway, I could see Desmond sitting stiffly beside his wife, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I know you don't trust me anymore," Nola was saying, "and I understand why, but this baby changes things, doesn't it? We have to find a way to make this work." "Making it work doesn't mean going back to how things were," Desmond replied carefully. "What you did to my mother was unacceptable, pregnant or not." "I know," Nola agreed quickly, "and I want to make amends. I want to show both of you that I can be better." Mr. Patterson emerged from the dining room, his expression troubled. He nodded at me as I carried the tea tray into the living room, then cleared his throat to get everyone's attention. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I just got off the phone with our investigator and there's something you all need to know." Nola's face went pale. "What kind of something?" Mr. Patterson pulled out his tablet and set it on the coffee table. "We've been tracking Nola's movements and communications since yesterday, as part of building our case. What we discovered this morning raises some serious questions about the timing of this pregnancy." My hands began to shake as I poured the tea. Something in the lawyer's tone suggested we were about to learn something terrible. "What do you mean?" Desmond asked. Mr. Patterson swiped his tablet screen, bringing up what looked like a series of photographs. "These were taken 3 days ago at the Riverside Women's Clinic, about 40 miles from here." The first photo showed Nola walking into a medical building. The timestamp showed it was taken 2 days before our confrontation in the dining room. "I don't understand," I said quietly. "The Riverside Women's Clinic specializes in fertility treatments," Mr. Patterson explained, "but they also provide other services that include pregnancy termination procedures." The room went deadly quiet. Nola's face had gone from pale to gray, and I could see her hands beginning to tremble. "You're suggesting what, exactly?" Desmond's voice was dangerously low. Mr. Patterson swiped to the next photo. This one showed Nola leaving the same building, but the timestamp was different. It was from yesterday morning, just hours before she'd called me claiming to be pregnant. "I'm suggesting," Mr. Patterson said carefully, "that we need to verify the authenticity of that ultrasound." Nola shot to her feet so quickly she knocked over her teacup, sending hot liquid spilling across the coffee table. "How dare you? How dare you spy on me and then question my pregnancy?" "Sit down, Nola," Desmond said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "I will not sit down and listen to these accusations. I'm carrying your child, and this man is trying to destroy our family with lies and conspiracy theories." Mr. Patterson remained calm. "Mrs. Henderson, if you're truly pregnant, then a simple blood test will confirm it. Dr. Morrison could run one this afternoon." "I already proved I'm pregnant." Nola gestured frantically toward the ultrasound pictures. "You saw the baby. You heard the heartbeat." "We saw an ultrasound image," Mr. Patterson corrected. "But ultrasound images can be manipulated, especially with modern technology. What we need is verification that this particular ultrasound actually came from your body." I felt the room starting to spin around me. "Are you saying she faked the ultrasound?" "I'm saying it's a possibility we need to rule out," Mr. Patterson replied, "especially given what our investigator discovered about the clinic visits." Desmond stood up slowly, and I could see the terrible realization dawning in his eyes. "The first visit to the clinic was 3 days ago. That's exactly when you started acting different, Nola. When you suddenly became apologetic and started talking about wanting to make things right." "That's a coincidence," Nola protested, but her voice was rising to that familiar pitch that signaled panic. "And the second visit was yesterday morning," Desmond continued, his voice getting stronger. "Just before you called Mom with your sob story about being pregnant and afraid." "You're both crazy!" Nola spun around to face me, desperation clear in her eyes. "Lorna, you can't believe this nonsense. You saw the ultrasound yourself." But I was remembering something that had bothered me in the doctor's office, something I hadn't been able to put my finger at the time. "Dr. Morrison called you Mrs. Henderson," I said slowly. Nola blinked. "So? But you never legally changed your name when you married Desmond." "I remember because it caused problems with the insurance paperwork." The color drained completely from Nola's face. "You used my name to establish a patient relationship with Dr. Morrison," Desmond said, the pieces falling into place. "You pretended to be pregnant under a false identity." Mr. Patterson was already on his phone. "Dr. Morrison, this is David Patterson, attorney for Desmond Henderson. I need to speak with you about a patient using the name Mrs. Henderson." "Yes. I'll hold." "Stop," Nola whispered. "Please, just stop." But Mr. Patterson was already speaking to the doctor. "Yes, I understand patient confidentiality, but we have reason to believe someone has been using a false identity. Yes, the ultrasound from this afternoon." I watched Nola's face crumble as Mr. Patterson listened to whatever Dr. Morrison was telling him. When he hung up, the silence in the room was suffocating. Dr. Morrison confirmed that the ultrasound images we saw today were not from a current patient named Mrs. Henderson, he said quietly. They were archive images from a patient who gave birth 6 months ago, someone who had given permission for her ultrasounds to be used for educational purposes. The truth hit me like a physical blow. She stole someone else's ultrasound pictures. The real Mrs. Henderson, the woman whose images those actually were, had a healthy baby girl in February, Mr. Patterson continued. Nola somehow gained access to archived medical files and used them to create a false pregnancy. Desmond was staring at his wife as if he'd never seen her before. "You're not pregnant." "I was trying to save our marriage," Nola burst out, all pretense finally abandoned. "I was trying to give us a chance to be a real family. By lying about a baby?" I couldn't keep the horror out of my voice. "By giving you something more important to focus on than your precious relationship with him." Nola pointed an accusatory finger at me. "I knew if there was a grandchild involved, you'd both do anything to make the marriage work, including forcing me to live with my abuser," I said quietly. "You're not abused," Nola screamed. "You're spoiled. You're a selfish old woman who can't stand to see her son happy with someone else." The mask was completely off now. This was the real Nola, the woman who had tormented me for months, the woman who had calculated every cruelty to drive me away from my own son. "Get out," Desmond said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What?" "Get out of my house, right now, before I call the police and have you arrested for fraud, theft, and elder abuse." Nola looked around the room desperately, searching for someone to take her side, but there was no one left. She had played her final card and lost everything. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice turning venomous again. "Both of you will regret choosing her over me." "The only thing I regret," Desmond replied, "is not protecting my mother from you sooner." As Nola gathered her things and stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Relief so profound it made my knees weak. But there was something else, too. Something deeper than relief. For the first time in my life, I had witnessed my son choose me unconditionally, not out of duty or obligation, but out of love and respect. The nightmare was finally over. But the real healing was just beginning. 6 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of what had truly become my home, watching the morning sun stream through the windows as I prepared breakfast for 2. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if Nola's departure had lifted a darkness that had been suffocating us all. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago. Mr. Patterson had been right about the evidence being overwhelming. When faced with criminal charges for fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse, Nola had agreed to a quick, quiet dissolution of the marriage with no contest. She'd even returned most of the money she'd stolen from my Social Security, though Mr. Patterson suspected she'd hidden more than she admitted to. The restraining order was still in effect, and as far as we knew, Nola had moved to another state. There had been no phone calls, no surprise visits, no attempts at manipulation. It was as if she had simply vanished from our lives, leaving behind only the memories and the hard-won wisdom of having survived her psychological warfare. Mom, you don't have to cook breakfast every morning, Desmond said as he entered the kitchen, already dressed for work in one of his navy suits. I can grab something on the way to the office. I want to, I replied, plating his eggs and bacon. Besides, it's nice having someone to cook for who actually appreciates it. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Nola had thrown that plate 6 months ago, and took a bite of his breakfast. This is perfect, thank you. We ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, something that would have been impossible during the Nola years. Back then, every meal had been a minefield of tension, waiting for the next cruel comment or deliberate provocation. Now, breakfast was peaceful, a quiet time for us to connect before Desmond left for work. I have something to tell you, Desmond said as he finished his coffee. My stomach clenched reflexively, a response I was still working to overcome. Months of living with Nola had trained me to expect bad news, and I was slowly relearning that conversations with my son didn't have to be filled with dread. What is it? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. I've been seeing someone, he said quietly. Her name is Sarah, and she's a teacher at the elementary school near my office. We've been dating for about a month now. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by happiness. Desmond deserved to find love again, real love with someone who would treat him and our family with respect. Tell me about her, I said, settling back into my chair with my own cup of coffee. A smile spread across my son's face, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in years. She's wonderful, Mom. Kind, funny, patient with kids. She's been teaching 3rd grade for 15 years, and she volunteers at the animal shelter on weekends. She sounds lovely. When do I get to meet her? Desmond hesitated, and I could see a flicker of the old anxiety cross his features. Are you sure you're ready for that? I don't want to rush things, especially after Nola, I finished for him. Desmond, what happened with her doesn't mean I'm afraid of you finding happiness again. It means I'm better at recognizing the difference between someone who's good for you and someone who's using you. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. I'm so sorry, Mom. For everything. For not seeing what she was doing sooner. For not protecting you better. For making you feel like I'd chosen her over you. You did protect me, I said firmly. Maybe not in the way either of us would have preferred, but you found a way to gather the evidence we needed to get rid of her permanently. You saved us both. I should have trusted my instincts from the beginning. I knew something was wrong when you started losing weight and seemed afraid all the time. I should have confronted her immediately instead of playing detective. I squeezed his hand. If you'd confronted her without evidence, she would have found a way to turn it around on us. She was that manipulative. The way you handled it ensured that she couldn't wiggle out of the consequences. Still, Desmond said, I hate that you suffered for so long while I was building my case. The suffering is over now, I replied. And maybe it had to happen the way it did so we could both learn how strong we really are. It was true. The past 6 months hadn't just been about healing from Nola's abuse. They'd been about rediscovering who we were as mother and son, rebuilding a relationship that had been damaged long before Nola came into our lives. Speaking of Sarah, Desmond said, changing the subject with obvious effort, I was hoping you might join us for dinner this weekend. Nothing fancy, just the 3 of us here at home. I'd love that, I said, meaning it completely. After Desmond left for work, I walked through the house, taking inventory of how much had changed. The dining room where Nola had humiliated me was now a bright, welcoming space where Desmond and I played cards in the evenings. The living room where she'd spent hours on the phone bad-mouthing me to her friends was now filled with books and plants and the comfortable quiet of a real home. I'd made changes, too. With Nola's cruelty no longer sapping my energy and confidence, I'd started taking better care of myself. I'd gained back the weight I'd lost, started doing the gentle yoga videos I'd always wanted to try, and even joined a book club at the local library. For the first time in years, I had friends again, women my own age who appreciated my company and treated me with respect. The phone rang,